Hey guys, it's Gary. I'm back again today. Wasn't sure what I was going to do actually, and I've got a few things, ideas for doing a couple discographies by specific artists, and they're on ice right now. I'm missing a couple vinyls that I want to show for them. In a couple cases, I don't know how to keep the length of some of these down when you're talking about some of these guys with extensive discographies that I have. I've already gone on for an hour on some of these, and even I'm looking at the stack of some of these other ones, and it's like, I don't know how I could go on for less than an hour and a half. You know, if this one took an hour to do, and I thought it would take 20 minutes, and I'm looking at this one and thinking it would take an hour to do, I could imagine how long it would actually take. Anyway, didn't know who I was going to do today because I didn't want to do one of those potential 90-minute videos. And I was flipping through some of Carm's old videos, and late in March he did one of the archives that was inspired by Darrell Washington, actually. And Carm kind of just randomly grabbed some stacks of CDs of his, so it wasn't focused on a particular artist. And he hit on several things that said, oh yeah, okay. But the primary one was German pianist Wolfgang Dauner, and I'm like, oh, I could do one on him and probably keep it under an hour. Who's still out there doing it, born 1935. Still out there making albums and stuff like that, though. In America, stuff is really nearly impossible to come by. And I'm glad I snatched up the stuff by him that I did. So I'm going to start out off with solo discs of his, which I don't have many of. Oh man, I forget. I put stickers on these for my own reference, and then I can't show the cover. I got a bunch of things that are originally on Mood Records here, and these go back to, I want to say the early to mid 70s. Here's Solo Piano, just a disc of just that. Wolfgang on his own, kind of intense looking there. Solo Piano disc on Mood Records. Got this. I don't know how I got it. Import. I think it must have been an import. I think there was a company that's not around anymore that was actually based here in New Jersey that was very big on importing certain labels. I think Mood was one of them, and Freedom Records was another. And with that label not existing here in Jersey anymore for distribution, I don't know if you can get these. You know, I mean, apart from individuals selling them. Here's another one. Now, this one is actually from 1982. I didn't think it was that recent. Another Downer disc. That's not a Downer, actually. Wolfgang on piano and Albert Mangelsdorff on trombone. Now, trombone has got to be probably trombone and tuba, definitely ranking in my two least favorite instruments. And just the fact that I would buy this with a featured instrument is a trombone will tell you something about the respect that I have for the gentleman involved. Albert Mangelsdorff is well known, a German jazz musician also, and of course Wolfgang Dauner on piano. So these just duets again on Mood Records. This is from '82. That's much more recent than I thought it was. You know, nice, spacious, because there's not obviously a rhythm section there. Here's the one that Carm showed, and this is a particular favorite of mine, 1978. Another solo disc. This one is my top two favorite Downers. Wolfgang Downers, that is. Changes. And this is from September 78. Again, it's totally solo disc, but here Wolfgang is also, in addition to playing piano, he's playing synthesizers. Now, the synthesizers are really early, dated, basic sounding. Most of these, taking a look at, not all of them, but most of the synthesizers, you can tell are monophonic, and they've got some really early sounds on them. But I love those sounds. But definitely, you could tell them when it was recorded. And but still, despite that, still love this disc. Still my favorite disc. All, you know, pretty much all originals on these albums. All compositions. Downer's not really doing jazz standards, and he is a jazz pianist. There's a jazz influence in there, but he doesn't sound like a bebop pianist. He's got his own style, just like Keith Jarrett has his own style, all coming out of that mainstream jazz territory, though. Here's one that I bought not that long ago, and it's a repackaging of two of his albums, and one of them is Changes, the one I just showed. The reason I bought it is because the other album, Zietlauf, I cannot get otherwise, and this repackaging only came out in 2010 on a different label, Inacoustic Music, with a K. Inacoustic, it looks like the name of it is. Two CDs, and again, so I got another copy of Changes on there. But this Zietlauf disc is really something. Now, if I remember correctly, I'm going to look at the date for this because that one has a lot more of an updated sound to it. And if I recall, there's unfortunately, at least in this book, Zietlauf was recorded in August of '88, and so it's got more of an updated sound. And unfortunately, it doesn't tell you who plays on Zietlauf. Changes, I know from my previous issue of it that's all solo. Zietlauf, nothing. It doesn't mention any other musicians. It could be another solo disc, but I'm hearing like recorder type of flutes and things like that on there that I've never heard Wolfgang Dauner play before. So I don't know whether he's playing instruments that he hasn't played in previous albums or in previous years, or whether there's guests on there that aren't credited. But it's Zietlauf. I guess I'm German. I should know these things, but I don't. It's a fantastic disc. If you could get that, or this repackaging of the two discs, wow, that's a really great album. That's a really great album. And here's another one on the Mood record label. It's weird because I thought I must have bought these when they were fairly new releases, because wow, I thought I had this before 2000, but I couldn't have because it looks like it was recorded in 2000. Very surprising. I thought I had this much longer than that. Wolfgang Dauner, the late Charlie Mariano, my favorite saxophone player in the whole world, and Dino Saluzzi, who's a bandoneon player. And bandoneon is an instrument, again, it sounds like the accordion. I'm so-so about it. But with the talent involved, just like the previous, disc with the trombone and all that, I can get by it. There's enough going on. Pretty album. They did another album together, which I don't have, and I just found out about it years later. And that is apparently, I think it's a live album that the three of these did. So it must have been, and it's pretty typical that the jazz musicians will get together to create a live gig thing, and after they've played some live gigs, often they'll go into the studio and record an album, as opposed to the more popular way of recording an album and going out to promote it. The jazz world's a little different because when you record an album, it doesn't come out for like maybe 8 months until after it's recorded. By then, the musicians in a lot of these projects are just onto something else and doing something else. So that particular lineup of musicians really aren't available to go and tour behind an album, to promote an album that is not going to sell incredible numbers anyway. So in the jazz world, a lot of times these guys get together just out of, this is the pool of musicians who are available, or these are guys I know, or, ooh, let's try this, we've never played together before. And they go out and they do live gigs, and sometime right around the live gigs is when they end up actually, or shortly afterwards, recording an album. And if you like the album, you probably never get to see them live as a result, because they're usually onto other projects. But it doesn't hurt that my favorite saxophone player in the world is on this. Nice album for what I remember. But here is something that ranks as not only one of my favorite Wolfgang Dauner albums, but one of my favorite Charlie Mariano albums. Again, Wolfgang Dauner and Charlie Mariano, supposedly this is a movie soundtrack, but you wouldn't know it to listen to the music. So you've got Dauner playing keyboards and synthesizers on this, Charlie Mariano on the saxophones and flutes and all that, and there is a third musician, a percussionist, Ernst Stroher, percussionist, who I believe is German, and this is again Mood Records. When is this from? I'm looking for a year, and I want to say the early 80s, but I can't find a date on this thing. And I'll tear the booklet out, and the booklet is full of information, as you can see. Here's the inside of the booklet. Wonderful. Thanks. So there's got to be a date on here somewhere in minuscule print that my eyes can no longer read, more than likely. I want to say that this sounds like it's from the probably late 70s or early 80s possibly. But this is another one that I've had for so long. And it's a film soundtrack, but the film is not something that we would be able to probably track down to look for a date. But beautiful. This is you know, Charlie's doing his flutes thing on here too. He's playing bamboo flutes as well as alto sax. The percussionist isn't so much a drummer as he's playing kind of percussion that sounds ethnic, but probably more hand drums. And Wolfgang Dauner doing acoustic and electric keyboards. This was an album that really just is one of those. I don't come across these too much in the last 15 years or so. One that sometimes you just can't take off. You keep listening to over and over and over and over again. It's a beautiful album, and man, I don't know. I'm torn. If I were to tell somebody just to get one Wolfgang Dauner disc, doesn't hurt that Charlie Mariano's on here, but that would be tough because I like that Zietlauf so much too, and the changes. But that Tagore, this is a killer. Very, very not avant-garde, but there's some early sounding synthesizer things, which is what makes me think it's probably from the late 70s. And just a nice band. There's not the three musicians don't play together in all tracks. Some tracks will be a duo with just keyboards and like saxophone or flute with no percussion. And then the percussion is not on every track of the album. It's spread throughout it, but it's really nice, like 43 minutes or so. That's a fantastic, beautiful album. And it's a shame. These all pretty much went out of print. Continuing on, though, here's another one that Wolfgang Dauner is part of with, I think it's Martin Colby and Ralph Illenberger, two guitarists. Now, Ralph Illenberger actually for a short time got fairly popular here, playing kind of smooth jazz. He's very acoustically oriented, but he plays electric too. But in the, I want to say in the late 80s or so, he had a whole bunch of solo albums. They weren't funky, because nowadays when I think of what smooth jazz became, it was all very funky. But prior to every smooth jazz tune being a funk tune, they were playing some things that were a little more laid back maybe, or just didn't necessarily have to be funky. And Ralph Illenberger made a killing for a few years there and had some very successful solo albums here in the U.S. And if I'm not mistaken, he actually moved from Germany to the U.S. And I want to say he lives in Colorado or something like that. This is a really good album. Ralph Illenberger and Martin Colby had a duo together, and they recorded a bunch of albums together. A couple I have and a couple I don't have. And then they did a couple things like this where they threw in with Wolfgang Dauner, even better. And it's not a real full, despite there being two guitarists and keyboards, it's not a real full-sounding thing intentionally, because again, there's no bass and drums. It's just the three of them. And I don't think, from what I remember, Wolfgang Dauner doesn't play on every track. But it's a really nice combination of these three German guys. Probably not to be repeated, because at least Ralph Illenberger no longer lives in Germany, I'm sure. I'm not sure where Martin Colby is now. But this is another nice album, and they did, I want to say, I think, and I might even have it here, but it's not in my stack together here. I want to say that they did another disc together, possibly without Dauner, but I know that Eberhard Weber plays on a Colby and Illenberger disc on like 2 or 3 tracks, and I'm not sure whether or not it's one that they made with Wolfgang Dauner in it or not. However, speaking of Eberhard Weber, I didn't know this until recently, but he was the one of the longest, closest musical associates of Wolfgang Dauner. Now, I didn't know that, but then when I started buying some things, here's a reissue from on the MPS label. It's a Wolfgang Dauner trio. This is from 1970. And the trio has a drummer I've never heard of, Roland Wittich, on drums, with Eberhard Weber on bass from 1970. Now, Wolfgang Dauner actually recorded very, very, very early on for the ECM record label. He was one of the first guys to have an album come out on the ECM record label and never recorded again for them. But apparently that album, which I don't have, had Eberhard Weber on it. And I don't know if that is the thing that turned the ECM record producer Manfred Eicher onto Eberhard Weber, because prior to that Eberhard Weber had not recorded for ECM, and a couple years later all of a sudden Eberhard Weber's a big solo artist on ECM Records, and yet his first appearance on ECM Records is on the only solo album that Wolfgang Dauner ever did for the label. So I don't know why there weren't any more Wolfgang Dauner releases on ECM. But go all the way back to the most recent album I have in my stack from 2007, Eberhard Weber album, which is a live album, a career kind of spanning live album with a lot of guests on it, including orchestra and stuff like that. And it was oddly, I believe this was the last thing that Eberhard Weber did before he had his stroke. So this was the last album of his that came out on ECM prior to the two albums that he did where he was compiling the old bass solos, Encore and Resume, I think. Yeah. Where he took the old bass solos and he recorded some keyboard things over it and got some additional musicians in. But this would be the last Eberhard Weber album to come out before Eberhard Weber's stroke. And the reason I'm showing it here, this came out in 2007, is because this was Wolfgang Dauner does appear on this. It was pretty much a lot of associates of Eberhard Weber throughout his career, and they were doing all of his, all material throughout Eberhard Weber's career, and things that he chose to play himself. So he's got a lot of remakes of tunes, and people that Eberhard Weber played with in the past, like Gary Burton's on here. And Eberhard Weber had done 2 albums with Gary Burton, but also toured with him. Jan Garbarek. Eberhard Weber was in Jan Garbarek's band for since 1978 until he had his stroke. So he was the bass player touring with him. So Jan Garbarek is on here. Rainier Bruninghaus, the keyboard player, is also on here, which is a longtime associate of Eberhard Weber. Bruninghaus probably shows up on his disc more than any other musician, because he was part of Eberhard Weber's Colors band, but also was on most of his solo discs as well. Marilyn Mazer on percussion, which was part of Jan Garbarek's group. And again, Wolfgang Dauner on piano. Wolfgang may only play on one track on here, but this was literally his first ECM appearance in something like 37 years on an ECM disc. It wasn't under his own name, but worthwhile listening for a lot of reasons. A lot of great musicians on there, including Wolfgang Dauner. Wolfgang Dauner was also a part of this other group that I've got this stack that's about to fall off my leg here, called the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble, which was around for a lot of years. Wolfgang Dauner was the keyboard player for this band, and actually one of the few musicians that stayed throughout their entire career, because these guys went until recently, and they had a few deaths and things like that, and the musicians changed quite a bit. But Wolfgang Dauner, as far as I know, unless they came out with an album very recently in the last few years without him, he was a part of every single album. Other musicians that were originally part of this group were Eberhard Weber. Eberhard Weber also stayed with them, I believe, up until his stroke, because I remember seeing a CD or two with Dave King replacing Eberhard Weber. And I don't know if that was after Eberhard Weber's stroke, which would make those fairly recent releases, or if Eberhard Weber was just too busy touring with Jan Garbarek. But on really all of their first, I don't know, I don't have all of them, 7, 8, 10 albums, Eberhard Weber was part of it also. Also initially part of this was Charlie Mariano. So you've got a lot of Eberhard Weber associated musicians in here. Charlie Mariano, can't go wrong with him. This band was essentially, they called it the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble. There's not a whole lot of rock in there. It seems like the musicians were all either British or German. I'm not really locating musicians from other countries besides that. And some other guys in here that I got turned on to from here are Volker Kriegel, the guitarist, a German guitarist, who also was a very long time associate of Eberhard Weber. But there's not a lot of recordings of them playing together, and yet they toured together and were very good friends in the late 60s, early 70s, before the two of them started doing a lot of recording. And I've got a bunch of Volker Kriegel albums, and I was going to show them, but I think it would make the video too long. And I might do a short Volker Kriegel video, but I'd be showing all these because these are mostly what I have of his. So he was a guitarist that kind of embraced the early fusion thing without getting it too out of hand with it. Still very listenable, still very steeped in jazz, but also with one ear toward a more modern sound. And he unfortunately passed away in 2003 of cancer. But he's got some nice solo discs too, many that I don't have and I wish I had, but those are, again, those things that you're buying as imports, and they're going in and out of print, and they're very hard to get. But the other folks in this band are, if you're familiar with European jazz, especially German jazz, Albert Mangelsdorf, the horn player, plays on this. Ack von Royen, who was a longtime associate also of a lot of German musicians, including Eberhard Weber. Ian Carr, the British trumpet player. I already mentioned Charlie Mariano. Barbara Thompson, the saxophone player, British saxophone player, and John Heisman, the British drummer, also in Coliseum too. So these guys did a lot of touring, made a lot of albums, and I have a bunch of them here to show. Here's a Live in Berlin album. I'm going to look at some, trying to find dates on these is not that easy. These are all pretty much late 70s. Nearly all of these are on Mood Records. This is 81. This is 81. The Live in Berlin as Eberhard Weber, still Charlie Mariano, Ian Carr, Ack von Royen. Kenny Wheeler is playing on this. I completely forgot he played with the group as well. So it seems to be a lot of British musicians. Wolfgang Dauner, John Heisman, Volker Kriegel, Barbara Thompson, Albert Mangelsdorf. So I forgot Kenny Wheeler played in here too. Wow. First one I showed, by the way, the album called Teamwork is from 1978. I think that's around the time they started in the late 70s. I'm not showing these in order. Okay, here's another one that, this is from 77, so this even predates the first one I showed. And here's one that I cannot pronounce. Can you see the title? Should I try? Live in Schuttenhaus? It looks like Schuttenhaus. 77. And who's in the band? Ack von Royen, again, Ian Carr, the trumpeter, Volker Kriegel, guitarist, Wolfgang Dauner, keyboardist, Barbara Thompson, saxophonist, Eberhard Weber, Albert Mangelsdorf, Charlie Mariano, and John Heisman. So, yeah, these are, these are guys that somebody like Carm would, know 90% of, if not more. Here's an album from February 87 called Round 7. And a lot of the same musicians on here. Unfortunately, this one they don't have a breakdown. Okay, Ack von Royen again, Ian Carr on trumpet, Charlie Mariano still with the group, and this is from 87, right? Barbara Thompson, Albert Mangelsdorf, Wolfgang Dauner, Volker Kriegel on guitar, Eberhard Weber on bass, John Heisman on drums, and Johannes Faber on trumpet and flugelhorn. They often had two trumpet players, and I guess sometimes Kenny Wheeler filled in that second slot of trumpet flugelhorn. Johannes Faber is the guy on this one. This is from 87. Weird that they managed to keep so many of the same personnel, because this band was pretty much a touring band. Most of these some of them are studio. Most of these are just live recordings. And it's kind of incredible that all these musicians, because just about all of these guys had solo careers, that they were all managed to free up their schedules at the same time to do these tours with the Jazz and Rock Ensemble. 79. See, they were doing something every year, starting from 77 teams. Here's one called The Break-Even Point. And again, who's in here? Barbara Thompson, John Heisman, Albert Mangelsdorf, Eberhard Weber, Volker Kriegel on guitar. You see, it's all the same guys. Wolfgang Dauner, Charlie Mariano still in here, Ian Carr, Ack von Royen, and this one has Kenny Wheeler, and that's second trumpet slot. Hell of a band. I mean, you could make 6 bands out of this, you know, and I'd be happy. Here's one I bought, and this is a more recent repackaging. Again, on that In Acoustic label, INAKUSTIK. Came out in 2010. So In Acoustic, it looks like, bought up the rights to the Mood Records catalog, because all of those were on Mood Records, and they started releasing two packages, 2 for things. And this is the Break-Even Point, which is the one I just shown, but it's also another live album, Live Opus Shex, which I can't even pronounce. That I bought that because I didn't have that second album. And let me see if I can very quickly tell where and when that was recorded. So that one came out in 2010. And that was recorded June of 1984. Barbara Thompson, Ian Carr, Wolfgang Dauner, John Heisman drums, Volker Kriegel guitars, Albert Mangelsdorf, Charlie Mariano, Ack von Royen trumpet, Eberhard Weber bass, Kenny Wheeler again. So it's incredible how a band this big, and this wasn't obviously their only place that these guys could earn a living, or did, or even made enough money to be able to live on the money they made from this, how they were able to coordinate all their schedules to make this many records together. Here's one called Highlights, which I believe you don't get much information in these packages, and this is a Mood Records thing. I believe this is a compilation. The title would bear that out, kind of. And it tells you nothing. It doesn't tell you that it's a compilation. And I think at one point I did a comparison looking at the titles that are on here, the song titles. And this one doesn't even list the musicians, which even more so leads me to think that it's a compilation. And most of the tunes I was able to find on other albums in the same length, because again, they could do different live versions of the tracks. But when I did a comparison, I found there's 9 tracks here. I probably found 7 of them on other albums, and they appear to be the same length as on the other albums. So I think this is a compilation, and the 2 tracks are probably from a disc I don't have, because I don't have every single disc that they made. So again, this is just what it says. I think it's a compilation. I think it's a highlight. And they're very careful to feature at least 1 track by every musician. And there's actually one from Eberhard Weber on here, 2 from guitarist Volker Kriegel, 1 from Charlie Mariano, and 2 from Wolfgang Dauner. And another compilation, and I probably had almost all this material, but I bought it again, and once again on the In Acoustic label, which came out in 2010. And this is definitely a compilation. Interesting concept this time, though. The United Jazz and Rock Ensemble plays Wolfgang Dauner is 1 disc, where they basically just take only the tracks that were written on the previous albums by Wolfgang Dauner and kind of put them all together. The other disc is the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble plays Volker Kriegel, where they did the same with the guitarist, who's founding member of the group also, where they just selected the Volker Kriegel tracks that were written and also performed, with him, but primarily the writings by him, and kind of compiled them onto 1 disc. So if you were a hardcore fan and you just wanted to hear just the Volker Kriegel stuff, you'd be missing a lot, because obviously he plays on a lot of other people's tracks too. But their feature here, or their primary point of focus here, is really his compositions. And you do get a little bit more of him stretching out as a result on it. Same with the Wolfgang Dauner disc. So again, and this probably, considering how much Wolfgang Dauner wrote for the group, this wouldn't be everything that he wrote for the group. This is more, again, like a highlights of what he wrote. But it was not a bad idea. If you're going to do a compilation, which are always sketchy at best, it's nice to have that focus. Even though I had that material, I bought it. I have 1 more disc, and that's it. This is an interesting group, and this is one that I think I've seen this now on Amazon, but when I bought it, it wasn't even coming up on Amazon. It's a group in the year 2000, which was still during the course of when the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble was still actively in existence. But the strictly just kind of the German guys from the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble, which was pretty much German and British musicians, formed a group called the German Jazz Masters. I think they only made this one CD, and again, this is 2000. But this is, if you just played it in, if you mixed this disc in with the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble, you would just think it was another one of their discs. The primary reason why is half the musicians are from the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble. You have Eberhard Weber on bass, Wolfgang Dauner on drums, and Albert Mangelsdorf on trombone. You also have a couple very well-known German jazz musicians, if you know them. Manfred Schoof on trumpet and flugelhorn. I'm surprised he wasn't part of the United Jazz and Rock Ensemble, because he's very much in that era and that age. And Klaus Doldinger on saxophone. Klaus Doldinger, the guy, the only guy that runs the Passport group. Klaus Doldinger is Passport. So it's funny to see him as a sideman on anything, considering the success that he's had. Even just his soundtrack and the Passport albums, numbering I don't know how many. And a younger drummer, the only real young guy in here, Wolfgang Hafner, who was born in 1965, so it's a totally different generation, but he's a hell of a good kit drummer. Has played with Passport, and actually plays with an American band, oddly enough, called Metro, which is kind of like a, I want to say, well, it's got, it's a quartet of guitar, keyboards, bass, and drums. The bass player pretty much revolves all the time, but the three founding members that keep it going are the drummer Wolfgang Hafner and an American jazz pianist who I'm on his mailing list, and the guy's name escapes me now, who plays piano and electric keyboards in the Metro group, and Chuck Loeb, who's well known as a smooth jazz guitarist, but in Metro he plays in a more fusion-oriented way. The group Metro is more of a carryback kind of to the fusion era, but thankfully, at least to my ears, not like the Return to Forevers and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's a little more tuneful, based around tunes, but it's also a lot more aggressive and very electric. And Mitch Foreman, I think, is the keyboard player in Metro, and that's where Wolfgang Hafner. It's where I first heard him, and as a result, bought. It was weird because the Metro, the three main guys write all the material, and I fell in love with Wolfgang Hafner's material as a drummer. Drummers aren't often writers at all, and some of my favorite material on the Metro albums was the Wolfgang Hafner stuff. And then I found out Wolfgang Hafner has his really solo career for a young guy, basically young guy, at least in the jazz world. Incredible solo discs and some really good things, both electric and very purely acoustic. And unfortunately, I don't think he's really well known outside of Germany. But man, what a good writer, good writer, just and fantastic ear, and great ear for like putting musicians together and stuff like that, and works well in an acoustic and electric format. So he's one of those guys from the younger generation that will be probably around for another 30 years or so. But this is good. This is all German guys. It's half of the United Rock and Jazz Ensemble, and very much in that mode. I've seen this in recent years. This became a bit more available. Like I said, this is from 2000. And I think I finally, after paying a ridiculous price to get this because I was convinced I never would, it started popping up all over the place. So that's the way it goes sometimes. But essentially, this was. See, I always get off track a little bit with the musicians because there's always these associated guys. But that's my stack of Wolfgang Dauner and Wolfgang Dauner associated things, and certainly a worthwhile musician, and really, even amongst jazz fans, not very well known. Too bad ECM didn't. If ECM had picked up and recorded him more, I think he would be one of those musicians that would be as well known as most of the ECM musicians are, but for whatever reason they didn't. He's still out there recording, and I just hope his recordings in the future are going to be a bit easier to get than they've been. Okay, guys, I'm keeping it under an hour. And hopefully this meant something to you. I'm dying to play music in the background, but maybe I'm overly paranoid about copyright stuff because I don't know. Are they really going to pick up on Wolfgang Dauner? I don't know. But anyway, I hope everything's going well. I hope this video has some value in it for you. Perhaps you're sleeping now and there's the value. Okay, guys, I will be back all too soon. Hope everyone's having a great week. Bye.